Episodes of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast may contain strong language and violent content. Listener discretion is advised.
We met Sergeant Bergeron 10 years ago.
If the law changes, it puts a little bit more teeth to what we can do.
He talked to us about his diligence in fighting drunk driving. He was committed to cracking down on crime, and Chief David Tamala says the devoted officer never lost that bite.
He was an outstanding person, an outstanding officer, dedicated to the point where he was working today on a day he wasn't scheduled to work.
This episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast is sponsored in part by Law Enforcement Labor Services in Minnesota.
Law Enforcement Labor Services, also known as LELS, is Minnesota's largest public safety labor union, with over 7,000 Minnesota public safety members serving in all areas of public safety. Law enforcement, 911 dispatch centers, corrections, public safety administrative support personnel, and firefighters. Established in 1977, LELS serves over 260 different public safety agencies and over 450 locals across the state of Minnesota. With their administration, general counsel, 3 staff attorneys, and 14 business agents, LELS provides contract negotiations for better wages and benefits, grievance processing and representation, discipline representation, mediation and arbitration, assistance with representation for post-board hearings, and in-line of duty death benefits for survivor families. Find out more about law enforcement labor services at lels.org. lels.org. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sheriff Scott Rose from Minnesota, and I'm your host for today's new episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast.
Walking eastbound.
In each episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast, we'll share the details and the stories of how these men and women heroically lost their lives in the line of duty. Our mission is to help ensure their service and sacrifice is never forgotten. Thanks for spending some time with me today to remember and honor these fallen heroes. Steve Jobs explained they wanted to put an incredibly great computer in a book that you could carry around with you. In April of this year, the co-founder and CEO of Apple released the very first iPad.
But we think we've got something that is. And we'd like to show it to you today for the first time. And we call it the iPad.
By 2025, they had released 32 different generations of the iPad, with sales nearing 750 million tablets worldwide. It was originally developed as a photo app for people to share as they checked into different places and events. It was developed in San Francisco and was called Bourbon, B-U-R-B-N. The founders quickly realized people just wanted a networking service to share photos and short-form videos. So they released the app to the public online this year. Today, over 2 billion people use this social media platform. It's called Instagram. The most watched show on television this year was American Idol.
Kelly Clarkson, Burleson, Texas.
Lee DeWise, Mount Prospect, Illinois. Ruben Studdard, Birmingham, Alabama. David Cook, Blue Springs, Missouri.
Carrie Underwood, Dakota, Oklahoma. American Idol.
American Idol.
American Idol. Welcome home.
The year was 2010. The state had just experienced a pretty notable winter with heavy snowfall and an extended period of snow cover, including a major Christmas storm that had dumped significant snow across the state. Minnesota's winters are known to be brutal. Between the snow and the brutally cold temperatures, you have to be a pretty hardy person to live in this part of the country. The Twin Cities metro area had seen 61 days of 6 inches of snow on the ground or more over the winter, so the mild spring was a welcomed experience for many in the state of 10,000 lakes. Weather is always unpredictable in this state. Some would argue bipolar to a degree, and spring is no exception, with the second warmest April on record this year, with an average temperature of 55 degrees. This was, of course, the perfect weather for the state to open its new $435 million Target Field open-air baseball stadium in the historic Warehouse District of downtown Minneapolis.
And Target Field is born today officially in the opening game of a series with the Boston Red Sox. A new era of Twins baseball is definitely beginning, and we're just proud to be here. Dick Bramer along with Bert Blyleven. The opening day of a baseball season is always one of the most anticipated days of the year. But when you waited nearly 30 years to get back outside, this is something special.
And we could not ask for a better day.
The first game in the new stadium was April 12th, where the Twins hosted the Boston Red Sox, winning 5-2. They're known as the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. They were founded on opposite sides of the Mississippi, and they grew together, competing for prominence over the years, with St. Paul developed as a river port, while Minneapolis thrived around the industrial power of St. Anthony Falls. There are approximately 218 incorporated cities within the Twin Cities metropolitan region. One of these cities, bordering both the north and east sides of St. Paul, is the city of Maplewood. David Tamala was the police chief back in 2010.
Maplewood is a first-ring suburb of St. Paul. It borders St. Paul on two sides, on the north and east side. It's an L-shaped city, very unique shape, and the geography is very unique because we have such a long-running border with St. Paul. Maplewood is home to the global headquarters of 3M, and Maplewood's probably biggest asset at that time was Maplewood Mall.
3M was Maplewood's largest employer, providing jobs for around 12,000 employees. The Maplewood Mall opened in 1974, back when malls were big, hosting 120 stores and anchor stores like Sears, Donaldson's, JCPenney's, Dayton's, Kohl's, and Macy's. Maplewood offers ample green spaces and a mix of suburban charm, yet it's close enough to the heart of the Twin Cities and major highways to enjoy all the activities of the big city, or just commuting back and forth to work. While the city offers many positives for its citizens, it also has its share of crime issues, especially being just 15 minutes away from downtown St. Paul.
Back in 2010, our officers worked 10-hour shifts at the time, and we had an overlap shift through the busy evening hours. It was a changing city at the time. Things were becoming more and more challenging for the police. We were experiencing more serious assaults, probably more frequent homicides, which we would only see one every couple of years. Now it was turning into a couple every year. The authorized strength of our department was 55 officers. That, with hiring challenges, fluctuated from time to time from 50 to 55. The population at that time of Maplewood was about 39,000, and one of my goals that I used to use was to have 1.5 officers per 1,000 population.
Maplewood borders St. Paul on the north and east side. Officer Dave Longman was born and raised in St. Paul and served as a cop in Minnesota for 40 years. 38 of those years with the St. Paul Police Department. 17 of those years as a canine handler. He recalls how violence was on the uptick in his city.
In 2010, gang members had come into the city and had been established there. Shots fired had become a commonplace thing. The only thing that changed is when you went on shots fired, everybody and their brother would race to these calls. And if you were lucky, you may have found some casings, and we would pick them up and recover them as evidence, just as they still do. Now, when I talk to my friends in law enforcement or my son who's with St. Paul, when they get shots fired, the phones light up down at the comm center because these guys are shooting semi-automatic handguns, and they shave the triggers so they become completely automatic. And there's several guns at every shooting, every scene that seems to be. And these coppers nowadays are recovering 20, 30, 40 shell casings from shots fired where gangs are shooting, at each other or shooting at a car or shooting at a suspect on foot or into residences. But it's not one or two casings anymore. It's multiple casings. And the level of violence and the willingness, the disregard for safety, the lack of respect for life, it's a dangerous profession. The amount of violence that is out there and the willingness that these gangbangers are willing to do it's frightening.
One of the veteran officers with the Maplewood Police Department was 49-year-old Sergeant Joseph Anthony Bergeron. Chief Tamala and Joe both started at Maplewood around the same time and quickly became close friends.
He was hired by Maplewood the year after I was, so he started in 1984, and initially our careers kind of paralleled each other. The year he started, I went to paramedic school. Maplewood provided a paramedic program through the police department at that time, and then the following year, he went to paramedic school. We got paired up as paramedic partners. First, we had a relief shift, and then we went to an afternoon shift. He was probably one of the people that you would most want for a best friend. He had a personality that was so sharp, but yet had a sense of humor that a lot of times you couldn't talk about in public because he was just. He could come up with one-liners, right off the top of his head. But yet he could be one of the most sincere people in the world. And he was not only that way to the people who he knew and loved and worked with him, but he was that way with the people that he dealt with on the street. So many people would reference him when you'd talk to them after the fact, and they'd say, "Oh, I talked to Sergeant Joe about this," and he could befriend anybody in any situation, and that would show by the people that would later show up at our police department, or even probably showed up at his funeral. That demonstrated the wide variety of people that whose lives he touched and he befriended.
Joe and his wife Gail met when they were just kids, and after high school, they both felt the draw to serve their community as medics.
Met Joe when we were young. He got on the police department in 82, and then we hung around, did our thing, decided to get married, moved into Maplewood because he was working for Maplewood. We both joined the fire department in 86, so we were on the fire department. I was a firefighter paramedic. So we had that in common. Joe was a cop medic. I loved what he did. I really liked the medical portion of it. So I quit dental assisting. We didn't have the kids yet. I went back to medic school, got my medic license. Then I was a firefighter medic and a community service officer for Maplewood. So, it's, my take on this whole thing, I'm sure is very different than another widow's who had never been involved at all. He and I were medic partners on the street. So it was fun.
One of Joe's greatest strengths, according to Gail, was how he treated people.
He definitely had a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. But I think the thing that always stuck out for me was that he always treated everybody the same. He always treated people with respect, with dignity. He always took a really crappy situation and could turn it around and make it a positive one.
Gail and Joe started their family a little later in life with the birth of twin daughters. And while Gail was his queen, Joe was a dedicated girl dad who always made time for his girls.
He was very good at leaving his work at work, which is hard to do, but he made a point to do that. And we both had to do it. Only because, again, when we had the kids, it was the kids should be our focus. You know, I would run to go and do something. I'd come home. He'd be sitting in the chair. I'd have one of the girls cutting his hair, or they were in ponytails, and I had another one putting makeup on him. His girls were his girls. That is just the kind of girl dad he was. That was what he was about.
His daughters, Alexandria and Samantha, were 13 years old back then, and everyone knew them as Allie and Sam. While Sam doesn't remember cop dad being that age, she certainly remembers how great of a dad Joe was.
At home, he was just dad. You know, he obviously had the typical cop mentality of teaching his kids, like, you're always honest. We had the strongest morals. My sister and I talk about this all the time, how people our age just don't have the sense of ethics that we have, and I blame that on my mom and dad. You know, the first responder ethic. He taught us to always watch our surroundings and, you know, never trust anybody too much, because you never know if somebody's going to be trying to hurt you. But other than that, like, it was always goofy. He was so goofy at home, and, you know, he would let us do our girl things with him. Like, we would pretend to cut his hair, and we'd put earrings on him and pretend to paint his nails and do all of that. But at the same time, you know, he's a cop's cop, and he's raising 2 twin girls, and he took us hunting and fishing and go-karting and all. Like, we did it all when we were younger.
Allie also remembers how great her dad was.
Yeah, my dad definitely did a good job of. He was a cop when he was at work, but he was a dad when he was at home. It was always, yeah, my dad's a police officer, but like that, he was my dad, and he was the best dad.
Me and my sister, we were both definitely rambunctious and just super on the go all the time kids. We definitely like to challenge my parents, but he did a really great job of being there and showing up. So he challenged me and Sam when we needed it. Like, he was a shoulder when we were down. He was the support when, like, we felt we couldn't do it ourselves.
He was our co-softball coach for a while. He helped us with archery. We did volleyball for a while.
A lot of people don't know this, but he was also like super creative and like artsy. And that's kind of where I got my creative and artsy genes from. And he always helped me like express my creativity and like my abilities. And like, he'd come up with projects we'd do together, like building and painting a duck house. Or we used to have to do, we did like for Christmas one year in school, it was, you had to come up with some type of shoebox and put a design on top of it that like represented your family on Christmas. And so me and him constructed this complete house out of like popsicle sticks with our dog Jenna in it, me, my mom, my dad, my sister, and me and my dad were always super close. So like in it, it's like me and him standing next to each other with like my mom and my sister together and the dog in the front. We did like little Christmas trees, and we did like a Santa Claus with reindeer like coming off the house top. It was like one of my favorite projects we've ever done together. Yeah, he was very, very creative, and a lot of people just don't know that. So like to have a parent that would let me express my creativity, but also like kind of aid me in coming up with like these projects and keep it going, like it was always fun.
Joe was no stranger to the importance of family. According to his brother Don's wife, Jackie, Joe grew up in a big family.
There's 11 children altogether, so 10 siblings. So 4 boys and 7 girls. Don was number 6. Oh, there's 5 girls. And Donald, and then Joseph was right under him. So he's like 4 years younger than Donald, my husband. And then there's 3 more after Joseph.
In this big family, there are many who've served their communities. Joe's brother Jerome is a retired Ramsey County undersheriff. Brother Larry is a retired corrections deputy for Polk County, Iowa. Larry's daughter Ashley is a detective in Maplewood, where Joe served. Joe's sister Alice has 2 kids serving, Mike as a Chaska police sergeant and Jonathan with the FBI. Early in Joe's law enforcement career, he was working as a reserve deputy with Ramsey County. That's where he met Dan Lallier, and they quickly became best friends. Dan remembers Joe as a cop's cop.
Down to earth, working stiff, cop's cop, unbelievable humor. Could be on your worst day and he'd make you laugh, and that would lighten the load. Treated everyone how he wanted to be treated. Had a way with people, could talk to anybody. Would go the extra mile to do the job and not just get it done to get off shift. If you're not going to do it, then don't do it. If you're going to do it, you better do it the right way.
It was Saturday morning, May 1st, 2010. It was a beautiful spring morning in Minnesota. At 6 a.m., it was sunny and 50 degrees out. Their baseball team, the Twins, were scheduled to play at 3:30 at Target Field, Game 2 of a 3-game series against the Cleveland Indians. This time of year in Minnesota is wonderful. The leaves are budding on the trees, the grass is greening up, the birds are busy, and everyone is excited for the warm weather ahead. High school and college students were winding down their school years, and families were preparing for the summer break. Summer vacations, fishing trips, camping, and more. Spring sports were busy towards the end of the school year, and Joe took on an overtime shift that day to help a fellow officer support his kids.
As our supervisors did, and this was a Saturday morning when, there are no lieutenants or anybody around the building, and so you needed to have a supervisor working. So oftentimes the supervisor would work out where they'd trade a shift or whatever, or if one of them were to take time off, another one would volunteer to work. So that particular day, the sergeant who was scheduled took the day off, and Joe volunteered to work an overtime shift that day. So it was not his normal day to work.
Gail said switching shifts happened all the time at Maplewood.
So the officer, he was the coach of his daughter's soccer team. And so he took the day off and he and Joe flipped shifts, which wasn't an unheard of thing. They would do it all the time to try and help, everybody out.
It was the beginning of Joe's shift, 6:30 a.m., when dispatch radioed information on a carjacking.
Two suspects, apparently both had a handgun. First one's a black male, about 18 years old, 5'6", red hat, slender build. Second one, white male, bald, tattoo on his neck, also around the same age. Last seen running southbound from the location. That's all we got.
The carjacking was reported in the 1300 block of Ripley Avenue in Maplewood. The victim said he had been carjacked at a gas station near the freeway. While there were conflicting versions about what actually led up to the carjacking, what law enforcement knew was that there were two males who had taken someone at gunpoint and then took his vehicle and fled.
There was a carjacking on the border of St. Paul near 35E and Larpenteur, which is about, as the crow flies, 2 miles from where Joe was killed.
Officers were advised there were 2 young male suspects, one white male, one black male. A gun was displayed, and they were likely on foot in the area.
Joe was a magnet for finding bad guys, and so he took it upon himself to go south on the Bruce Bento Trail, which from where this car was dumped, I think was only a couple of blocks in Maplewood.
Joe decided he'd check on the Bruce Bento Regional Trail to search for the suspects. This blacktop trail, which is on an abandoned Burlington Northern Railroad corridor, intersects with the Gateway Trail and runs north to south, covering just over 8 miles, ending in the southernmost point of Lake Phelan in St. Paul. The trail is popular for walkers, bicyclists, inline skaters, and cross-country skiing in the winter. In many places, it's surrounded by trees on both sides, so it would provide good cover for someone hiding from the police.
He crossed Larpenteur Avenue into St. Paul, and just before he got to Arlington in St. Paul, which is probably 5 long blocks into St. Paul, he met up with the suspects there.
61-year-old Bill Longman was jogging on the trail near the intersection of Arlington Avenue and English Street when he heard a vehicle coming up behind him. It was about 6:45 a.m. That vehicle was Joe in his squad car, driving slowly down the trail looking for the suspects. The 2 engaged waves, smiled, and Joe drove by.
Sergeant Bergeron was in his patrol car, and I had heard something behind me, and I turned around, and it was a police officer, and I pulled over to the left-hand side and let the police officer go by, and I waved to him and he waved to me, and he proceeded south down the trail.
Bill then watched the 2 males approach the squad car.
and I seen two black and white male come around the front of the vehicle and around the front door, his open driver's side door. And I was kept on running, and I was about here, and the black male came up around the door and went like that, stuck the gun inside the vehicle and fired a shot.
Joe pulled up, stopped, never got out of his car. The suspects came around, and it sounds like Joe probably opened his car door as he was engaging these two in conversation, and one of them pulled out a gun and shot him through the open door or open window of the squad car as he sat in the driver's seat.
And I said, "Oh my God!" And I was looking in the direction, and I just kept on running towards the police vehicle, and the two males ran south on the trail, and I kept on running. It probably took me about 10 seconds from the time of the gunshot till I got down to the squad car, and there was Sergeant Bergeron had been shot in the forehead, and there was blood coming out of his head, and there was blood all over the dash and all over him and all over everything. And I proceeded to try to find a radio, and I couldn't find anything because everything was covered with blood. And then I saw one down on the side of his left-hand side of his belt.
Bill checked for a pulse and then grabbed the radio handset and called in, "Officer down, needs assistance." Bill used Joe's portable radio to tell dispatch that Joe had been shot, their location, and then gave the description of the two suspects, saying the man firing the gun was an African American. He described them as slim black male wearing large clothing in his late teens with a silver handgun. He said he was with a white male who was also armed with a shaved head and a tattoo on his neck, wearing a white t-shirt.
Officer needs assistance. Okay. Real. East, north of Arlington, officers shot. Subjects went south on Gateway Trail. One black male, one white male. Officers shot. Black male, southbound. Officer's been shot. He's up. One black, white male. Suspect proceeded east on Gateway Trail from Arlington. Black male, white. Stack description. Trail. Officer time ahead.
One would assume most joggers seeing this would have been absolutely terrified for their safety and would have run the other way. Not Bill. You see, Bill was a retired St. Paul firefighter and a former police officer. While most others would have run away, Bill ran towards Joe to try and help. He got on the radio and he called out what happened and gave a description of the two killers, which matched that given earlier of the carjackers. His quick actions helped first responders get to Joe as quickly as possible. He also helped by warning other officers who they were searching for and that they were armed. Bill would end up being the only one that saw this happen. His eyewitness account would be key in helping identify Joe's killers. Joe's shooting kicked off an hours-long manhunt by more than 100 officers from more than a dozen law enforcement agencies. The two shooting suspects Bill described were later identified as 21-year-old Jason John Jones and 21-year-old Joshua Michael Martin, both of St. Paul. Jones had been released from prison less than 2 months earlier after serving 3 years for aggravated robbery. Martin was also on probation for aggravated robbery of a pizza delivery man in Dakota County. He served time in prison as well. He had been out since 2008. Both had violent criminal histories, and both knew if they were caught for the carjacking, they would likely go back to prison. Gail and the girls were still sound asleep when Joe left for work, and when Gail woke up around 6:30 a.m., she called Joe like she always did when he was working.
I woke up at 6:30, which is pretty normal for me because that's the time I get up and go to work. And it was always, in the morning, I would always call him to say, hey, we're up, we're moving, this is what we're doing. And I called him on his cell phone, no answer. I called him on his office phone, no answer. And I didn't really think much about it. I just thought, well, he'll see that I called and he'll call me back, and he's busy, he's on a call.
St. Paul Police Canine Officer Dave Longman was off duty that morning. He was actually working a side job as security at one of the local Walmart stores. Back then, larger stores would often contract with off-duty officers for security within their stores. Dave got the call about Joe's shooting and was asked to come in.
My boss says, "Are you able to leave Walmart and can you respond to the scene?" And I says, "I can. But Paul, I have to run home and I have to get my dog." I left the dog at home. My son was 15 years old at that time. My daughter was in cosmetology school, so she was gone, and wifey was working. So I went home and I got the dog, and my kid was supposed to come up and meet me at Walmart. I was going to buy him a pizza for lunch. He had just got his license. And I woke him up. I says, "Dude, I have to go. Don't come up to Walmart." I didn't want to tell him everything that had happened. I says, "We just have to go in I got called into work real quick. It won't take long. I'll call you when I get done. And then maybe depending on the time, we can still have lunch." So with that, I responded to the scene over to Lake Phelan. As I was leaving Walmart and responding to the scene, August 26, 1994 was a day in St. Paul where we had 2 police officers shot and killed, and one of the guys was a canine officer, and they shot and killed his dog. Young Ron Ryan Jr. was a patrolman over in the east side, and he was shot and killed about the same time as Joe Bergeron. And Tim Jones was the canine handler who was at home on his day off, and he got called in to come to work with his dog to search for the suspect. I'm driving home, and I'm thinking, holy shit. And I'm looking back, because I was working that day. I had just finished, got called back to come into work because it was an all-call. And all I could think about, did Tim Jones and his dog have the same feeling of urgency that I have in my gut? I didn't tell a lot of people this, but I heard a voice in my head. I felt pressure in my chest. The hair on my arms stood up. I had this eerie feeling. And a voice told me, "You will have a better outcome than you did August 26, 1994.
Shortly after Bill reported Joe's shooting, Chief Tamala was notified.
It was a Saturday morning, and it was 6:45 in the morning. And at that time, the Nextel radios, they were a cell phone, but they also doubled as kind of a walkie-talkie. We had them, and, I was chief at the time, so it was always laying on my nightstand, turned on. And at 6:45, I just got blasted by one of our officers, describing to me, what had taken place. And I'm coming to from sleeping, trying to wrap my head around what he's telling me. And I was finally able to do that, to put together the location that they were at, which didn't initially make sense to me because it wasn't in Maplewood. He told me that Joe had been killed, and basically described, what was going on at that point. So I told him I'd be right there. That was probably 2 miles, 3 miles from my house. Quick, jumped up, got a uniform on, and jumped in the car and got over there. And there were, Maplewood squads there. There were St. Paul squads there. It was the crew that probably had worked in St. Paul the night shift, and then it was, I think, our oncoming day shift. And I pulled up, and I saw where the squad car was parked. And I got out of my car, and the first thing that I remember is it seemed like nothing was happening. They didn't know where the suspects went, and there weren't enough people there at that time to set up a large perimeter or anything like that. As far as the Maplewood officers go, their sergeant, their crew leader, had just been killed, and so they were kind of directionless at that point. And the St. Paul group, although we worked with St. Paul a lot, initially I didn't recognize anybody that was out there. And I remember asking someone, "Who's in charge of this scene right now?" And finally someone showed up that I knew, and It was then at that point where I said, okay, you have this scene. It's in your city. You have the perimeter. You're calling the shots. You got your people coming in, and basically turned it over to them. At that point, I knew I had to get out and let Gail know what happened.
One of the worst jobs as a cop is having to do a death notification, having to tell someone that their loved one has died. One of the worst jobs as a chief or sheriff is having to tell one of your officer's family that he or she has been hurt or, worse, killed.
And so I left there. I proceeded out to Gail and Joe's house, which is probably 12 to 15 miles away. And obviously no one was up at that house yet either. And I knocked on the door, and it took a while for Gail to come to the door. And, any cop spouse that gets awakened at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, it's probably not going to be good news. And so I told her what happened, and, told her that the details were still being filled in at this point. The suspects were still at large, and we talked for a while, and she was going to let her family members know. And I spent a little bit of time there, and then told her, I had to get back to the department. We had to. I believe that I had notified my command staff on the way out to her house, and so put that in motion with notification of our entire department. Who most of them showed up that morning and assisted in the search for the suspects.
I had just gotten out of the shower, and I heard a knock at my door. And I thought, this is really odd. It's like 7 o'clock, 7:15, 7:30, somewhere in there. And I thought, this is odd. What is the solicitor doing? And so I finished getting dressed. I didn't answer it. I figured, they'll go away. So I'm getting dressed, whatever, and my phone rings. My cell phone rings. And it was Dave. And he said, Gail, this is Dave. I need you to come to the door. I'm thinking, he must need something. What is the chief doing working? Still hadn't dawned on me. So I said, sure, hang on. I'm just going to get dressed. I'll be right down. So I went down, and I got to the door. And when I looked outside, I saw Dave. I saw the chaplain, and I saw one of Joe's buddies, Tim Floor. Still not really thinking about a whole lot about it, but I thought, well, this is odd. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to walk away from this door, and I'm not going to answer it, and it's going to go away. But I didn't. I answered the door, and I let him in. That's when they told me that he had been involved in a shooting, and all I kept saying is he dead? Is he dead? And finally, after about the third time I asked, I finally got a yes, he was dead. And I let out a pretty big shriek.
My sister and I had separate bedrooms at that time, and we were both sound asleep. And our bedrooms are on the upstairs floor of our house. And I remember waking up to my mom screaming, and she was screaming like, "No, Dave, no!" And I didn't know at the time that it was Dave Tamala. I have an uncle Dave as well, and I thought like he was here talking about something. So, I climbed down out of my loft bed that had a ladder up to the actual bed, and my sister woke up at the same time, and our doors shared a wall. So we both like meet each other at the threshold of our doors, and both of us are looking at each other like, what the heck is going on? And we go to, walk down the hallway. It's an L-shaped hallway, and as soon as we hit the stairs, I see one of my dad's partners walking up the stairs towards us, and he told us, he's like, go put on some clothes. Like, there's people downstairs. You need to talk to your mom. So, me, I'm like, screw that. Like, I threw on a damn bathrobe. And we went to go back downstairs and walk down the hallway together. And my mom was walking up the stairs towards us. And I've never seen her look the way she looked. And she was crying. And she grabbed on to Al and I. And she said, your dad's been shot. Then, my sister crumples and starts crying, and, she's crying, and I'm like, is he okay? Like, where is he? Is he okay? And she said, he died. And that specific moment like replays in my brain every time I talk about it,
The two suspects, Jason Jones, the shooter, and his accomplice Joshua Martin, had now split up. Officer Longman, along with his canine Cody, checked in to find out where they needed them to go.
I get to the east side, and they said report to the command post. So I go over, I'm working alone, I got my dog in the car, and I go and I report into the command post. And they said, we want you to go to an intersection, Birmingham and Ivy. And the commander said, we don't have a lot of information. But a police officer, they gave me the backstory on the two suspects. And then as far as the descriptions, they didn't have a lot of information. They said there's a white male, and then we believe it's a black male, but it could be a light-skinned black male. It could be Hispanic, could be another white guy with a dark tan. We just don't know. 18 to 20 years old, maybe for ages. We really don't know. But the good thing is the St. Paul SWAT team has both of these guys. Inner perimeter, both of them are there. St. Paul is completely surrounded, this wooded area where they're at. There's a secondary SWAT perimeter from the metro agencies. They have a metro SWAT team. Those guys have responded, and they have a secondary perimeter around that wooded area. So we're just going to kind of wait it out, and we're going to let the SWAT guys do their thing. So we want you to go, we need an intersection covered, Birmingham and Ivy. And just go there and just kind of keep your eyes open, kind of make sure people are in their homes if they're outside, if they're walking. Try to keep cars out of that area. You're far enough from the perimeters that you shouldn't have any problems. So I go, I put my car in the intersection. I got the lights on, Birmingham and Ivy. Dog's in the back seat. So I'm kind of sitting in the car. People are walking. They're out in their yards. And I'm telling them, hey, we have an incident. It's a very critical incident. Please go inside your house. Lock your doors. And if anybody comes pounding, knocking on your door, trying to get in, call 911. We had an officer that was shot and killed. We have very limited information. But please go inside and protect yourselves. And don't be outside here because bad things could happen. And people kind of look at you like you're, oh, well, it's Saturday and we want to get the yard cleaned up and we're going, you know what I mean? I mean, they did not understand the severity of what I was trying to tell them.
Jones was now walking southbound on Birmingham towards Ivy. He was thin, 5'10", wearing a white tank top and shorts. He was also carrying something in his right hand, a metal container. It was like an old green metal fishing tackle box, something like that. He was talking on his cell phone and at some point was holding his cell phone in front of his face, yelling into it, according to a witness. Dave Longman was at that intersection in his squad, on the phone with his daughter, when he saw a young male subject walking down the street towards him.
I was on the phone. I was talking to my daughter at her school. She had a break. And I said, Rosie, I got to go. I said, there's somebody coming walking down the street, and I need to go talk with this guy. So I see this young, tall, thin, black male come walking down the street, and he's like on his cell phone, and he's got like what looked to be like a kid's tackle box or a small tool kit with him, some type of a carrier box that looked like that. And I thought, oh, geez, this is kind of weird. And something told me, go out, talk to him, ID him. You're okay out here because there's 2 SWAT teams that are out there, and they got these guys locked down on the inner perimeter. I thought, I'm going to go talk to this guy. So I go up to this young kid. He's probably, 6'1", maybe 180 pounds. Young kid, light-skinned black male. And I said, hey, sir, I need to talk to you real quick. I said, hey, we've had an incident over here, and we're just IDing everybody that's coming and walking through here. And I says, do you happen to have an ID on you so I can just find out, where you live, what your name is, where you're coming, what your business is here? And I says, do me a favor. I says, get off your phone and set your box down. Do me a favor, I says, just turn away from me. And I says, I'm just going to check your pockets and pat you down. I says, just put your hands on top of your head here. Let me get your ID, get your information, and you're out of here.
Officer Longman started to frisk Jones while they were standing behind the squad, between the squad and a post office van.
As I went to pat him down, I noticed his right front pocket. Seemed like there was something, kind of a bulky item in there. And I took my eyes off of him to look at, see what this bulky object was. And the next thing I know, he breaks from my grip, and I feel this incredible pain in my face. What had happened is he had a tube sock in his waistband with what I was told, I never saw it, was a construction lag bolt with a couple of nuts on the thing. And so he had this as a weapon in his pocket. And I'm thinking, this can't be that guy. He's inside of 2 perimeters. He's locked down. Is this guy? And boom, I got hit in the face. And I lost my vision. Everything turned black. And I saw what looked like white fireworks, white streaks in my eyes. Everything was black. I had no vision. But I saw these streaks go in. They looked like white fireworks exploding into the sky. This has got to be this guy. And so all of a sudden, I go to grab onto my radio because I wore the belt, the radio on my belt. I had the shoulder mic up on my left shoulder. And I went to get on in St. Paul, Signal 13. I need help now. Send everybody. I went to call a Signal 13, and I could not feel the mic on my shoulder. And I thought, oh, fuck, now what am I going to do? And I still have no vision. And everything slowed down. I often heard guys involved in those incidents. This actually happened. Everything slowed down. And I thought, shit, I don't have my radio. How can I alert my fellow cops? Because I know the place is loaded with cops everywhere. And I remembered back to when I was just a kid going through hunter's safety program in order to carry guns out in the field to go hunting. And I thought, pull your gun and shoot 3 times into the ground. The guys will hear the gunshots. They'll be, if I can get 3 of them, they'll zero in. They'll say, shots fired on the radio, and I'll have everybody's attention. They just need to find me. They have to figure out who it was, because I don't have a radio and I can't call. I got 1 shot off into the ground. I got the gun in my right hand, and all of a sudden I start feeling the punches coming into my head. And this lone man, who later was identified as Jason John Jones, he's punching me, and I can feel him pulling my right arm back towards him. The gun is in my right hand. And he says to me, I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker. You're gonna die today, motherfucker. Give me that gun. And I could feel the punches. I could feel my arm getting pulled towards him. And I took my left hand and I remember wrapping it around the barrel of the gun. So I have 2 hands on my gun. And all I could think about is lunge forward to try and create distance from him. I'm still blind. I can't see. Everything is black. And I lunged forward to get away from him. Well, he went right with me. And the next thing I know, we're both on the ground. And he's still pounding on me, pounding on my head. And I stopped and I took an assessment of, you didn't hear a gunshot. You don't have any pain other than in your head, which is completely numb. Your face is complete, but you can still feel the impact of the punches. Stay in the fight. You're still in the fight. You still got your gun. Get to your feet. And when you get on your feet, You're going to have to shoot to defend your life, because now I know he is the killer from hours ago. He's killed one policeman. He's told me twice now that he's going to kill me, and I'm going to die today, motherfucker. So I know what his intentions are. I need to protect myself. I have no vision, and we're fighting over the gun, and I have no radio, and nobody knows what the hell is going on except the two of us. At one point, the punches stopped, and I thought, get up, get on your feet, get moving.
Now remember, Dave has his canine Cody with him, who is surely in the squad car just waiting to be let out to take on the threat.
We also have a bailout button on our gun belt, which can pop the back door of the squad car open. Remember, I have my dog with me, and I can get the dog out, and the dog we train to automatically pop that door and go after the person that is attacking us. But because I had no vision, and because I didn't know where he was, and the fact that he's trying to get my gun, I did feel that I could safely take my left hand off the gun to try and push the button and hold the gun in just my right hand when he's trying to get it from me. So I thought, well, that's not an option. Just hang on to the gun. I was able to get to my feet, and I remember turning. I thought, get up, get on your feet so you don't get kicked in the head, because I worried about getting kicked in the head. Well, when I was down on the ground, I saw pictures of my wife, I saw pictures of my kid, and I saw an image of a North St. Paul policeman who was killed months ago, Rick Crittenton. And I remember seeing him. He had the crew cut haircut, older copper like I was, and I saw Rick Crittenton in my mind. And all I could think of is I did not want to become an FBI statistic with another policeman shot and killed with his own weapon. I did not want to die in the city of St. Paul at Birmingham and Ivy on the east side. And all I could think of is keep both hands on your gun, get on your feet. And when you get on your feet, see if you can rub your eyes, do something, get your vision back, figure out where this guy is. Well, what's funny is when I did get up, all of a sudden my vision came back. And I saw him. He was several feet away from me. My vision was not clear. I remember seeing like 3 images of him. And all of a sudden it went to 2 images, then it went down to 1 image. And I couldn't really see. I didn't look at the sights of my gun because I couldn't really see well. I just went back to my training, and I assumed the stance, and I put my arms out the way you're supposed to shoot in front of you to get that shooter's stance. I had been to the range enough times that was ingrained. We had great training. Randy Barnett, our range instructor, really worked with us and did a phenomenal job in training us guys. And I remember his training. And I assumed that combat stance with the gun. And I remember lining up and pulling the trigger. And the gun clicked. It did not shoot. It did not fire. And I remember Randy Barnett telling us, clear the malfunction. Tap, rack, and go back to work. You're not done. Tap, rack, and go back. I remember him. And I even told Randy afterwards, I said, dude, you saved my life. It was the training. It was you, and I did exactly what we were trained by Randy to do. Tap, rack, clear the malfunction, and go back to work. That's what I did. And then I tried a second time to pull the trigger. And I looked, and I thought, shit, did I miss? He's still on his feet. And so I shot a second time. And I remember double tap. And I shot, boom, boom. And I remember shots 2 and 3, kind of picked him up a little bit, turned him a little bit, and down he went. And I remember that bulge in his pocket. I thought if he has a gun, he used a gun to kill the Maplewood officer. He's probably armed. That was probably a gun, and I shot an additional 4th round. And I remember, and I thought, okay, the threat at this point is down. My vision came back to me, and I looked for my radio, which was 8-10 feet away from me. And I think what happened is when he pulled that tube sock from his waistband, he spun and he hit me right in the face. And that's what caused the loss of vision. But I think it spun me when I got hit, that my radio actually flew off of my belt. And I remember getting on the radio, 617, 10-3. Which means clear the radio. 617, I'm at Birmingham and Ivy, and I shot a suspect that I believe is the ones that we are looking for. I am code 4, which means I'm okay. Well, I wasn't okay because I got the dog shit beat out of me. I lost my vision. I have now just shot and killed a guy who's laying in the street. I'm not okay. But I didn't want, I knew if I said that, if I said, or if I screamed into it, help, help, you know what I mean? Everybody that was in a position is going to leave. If one guy got out of the perimeter, where's the second guy? I don't want that second guy I don't want these cops to break perimeter to come on check on me because I said I was code 4, which I really wasn't. But for the sake of integrity of the perimeters and the search, that's what I aired. And within seconds, I had backup there for me.
When officers arrived to assist, Jones was laying just north of the squad car, and Dave Longman was on his feet by the squad. Jones died at the scene. Cops believed he was one of the 2 killers who did both the carjacking and murdered Joe. Law enforcement there now had 2 officer-involved shootings. 1 officer shot and killed, and 1 suspect shot and killed. Now they needed to identify and locate suspect number 2. Back at the Bergeron home, family and friends were gathering to support Gail, Allie, and Sam. Dan and his wife drove to Joe and Gail's house as soon as he heard Joe was killed. They were there when Gail said she wanted to go to the morgue. She needed to see Joe one last time. To Gail, none of this was real until she could actually see Joe.
And then finally about probably midday, certainly before that happened, of course, you're watching all the news media and all of that kind of stuff. And you know that one of the perpetrators is dead, that Dave Longman killed. Then you know the other one is still roaming. They still hadn't caught him yet. So probably about, 2 or 3 o'clock, they finally let me know that he had been taken to the morgue. And I said, I need to see him. They're like, do you really? I'm like, I need to see him, people. You don't understand this. It's not real till I see him. So I took the girls down with me because the first thing that went through my mind was Joe wanted to be cremated. That's all I knew. We had talked about that, and that was it. And I thought if they didn't get a chance to ever see him or say goodbye, they were never going to get that chance. So we went down to the morgue, and of course you walk through this long corridor, and it's lined with officers. And I went in, and I looked at them, and they had done a good job with covering up the injuries and that kind of stuff. So I thought, you know what, it's safe for the girls to come in. So the girls came in, and I guess that's probably when the reality of everything hit.
I remember coming in the front door, and the hallways were lined on both sides with cops from Ramsey County, St. Paul Police, Maplewood State Patrol. And then they had Joe on a gurney and he was all covered up to his neck. And they were still in their process of doing what they had to do. And you could see He had one bullet wound above the left eye, and I could smell powder, gunpowder, and I could see the stippling. So it was a short, it was a close range shot.
The stippling Dan referred to as small abrasions, burns, or punctures that are caused by gunpowder when someone is shot at close range, usually within 2 feet or closer. Officers with the West Anti-Crime Task Force had actually been working that previous evening trying to locate Jones because of other recent violent robberies and carjackings that they believed he was involved in. When these officers learned that Jones had been shot by Officer Longman and that law enforcement was looking for an unknown white male accomplice, they shared that Jones was known to hang out with Joshua Michael Martin. Task Force officers explained Martin matched the description given by the witness of Joe's shooting, and he was known to have a large neck tattoo. One of the Task Force officers contacted Martin by cell phone. He was able to reach him and had several conversations with him, but Martin was distraught and he was not turning himself in. Officers would follow up on several tips during the day, including one that said Martin may be in the area of Duluth and East Lawson. Officers familiar with Martin said he was associated with the apartment building at 1032 Duluth. Officers then quickly responded to that apartment building, and at one point they saw Martin come to the window. The task force officer who had been talking with Martin on the phone said Martin told him he'd cut his wrists and was contemplating suicide. Eventually, these officers talked Martin into surrendering, and he came out and was taken into custody without further incident and without anyone else getting hurt. Back at the Bergeron home, Gail was trying to notify family. She was trying to come to grips with their new reality, with the fact that Joe was gone, trying to figure out how they were going to move forward.
Then it was just kind of trying to sort through everything, trying to figure out what I was going to do. How, I can't even tell you the stuff that ran through my brain. I can't afford this. I can't afford to stay in the house. How am I going to pay for the girls? I can't do this by myself.
For the girls, remember they were just 13 years old at the time. Things are a blur from that day with all the stress of having just lost their hero, having just lost their father.
You know what? I do remember the nighttime, after we had gone and seen him. We came home and one of Dad's partners, spent the night at our house because we didn't want to be alone. And I remember my sister, my mom, and I all piled on the couch downstairs in our living room to sleep because we didn't want to sleep in our beds and we didn't want to be alone. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night because Tim was snoring. And I'm a really light sleeper. Everybody else is sleeping. And I remember crawling up the stairs and looking outside to see if my dad's car was in the driveway just to think, it was all a bad dream.
Police say the two men responsible for killing Sergeant Bergeron are Joshua Martin and Jason Jones, both men just 21 years old, and we've learned they have violent criminal past, including armed robbery. An officer shot and killed Jones, who was only let out of jail back in March from a St. Cloud Correctional Facility where he served time for shooting two people. Martin was last in jail in October of 2008 for robbery. Police found him at an apartment complex on Duluth Street after a 6-hour search yesterday.
The following day, the reality that this community had lost one of its own was weighing heavy on many.
Our top story this morning, the Maplewood Police Department is in mourning after losing a 26-year-old police veteran who was gunned down in the line of duty yesterday. Sergeant Joseph Bergeron was responding to a carjacking near Lake Phelan early Saturday morning when two 21-year-old men ambushed him. That led to a massive manhunt. One suspect was shot to death, but not before injuring a St. Paul police officer. The other eventually surrendered. Susanna Song is live near Lake Phelan this morning, where a vigil is set for later today. Susanna?
Yeah, Brad, I'm standing in a very sad spot this morning. I'm standing where Sergeant Bergeron was shot and killed. Several people have stopped by already today. Some people just parking their cars, looking out. Others standing here in silence, and still others clearly moved. One man jogging by was just sobbing. He couldn't keep back his tears. Now you can see that there is a memorial. People have left flowers here. There will be a visual at 10 o'clock this morning.
Officers in this area of the Twin Cities were still trying to recover after the 2009 murder of North St. Paul police officer Richard Crittenden, who was killed responding to a domestic dispute. Many of the 55 Maplewood officers were friends with Richard, too.
They had his funeral at Aldridge Arena, and Dan and Joe attended that together. Dan said to Joe, if something happens to me in the fire service, I do not want my funeral here. Please don't do it. Joe said to Dan, that's the same for me. Because for them, they both grew up Catholic. It didn't really seem like a service. And so it was like, okay, now what are we going to do?
Because this was a firearm-involved shooting of a police officer, it's going to be well attended. So they were worried about where can we hold this. Gail and him were married in a Catholic church in Maplewood, and there's nowhere near it would be able to hold it. So we had the kitchen table, and I believe it was my wife that made the comment, why don't we use the cathedral?
I'm like, okay, like, are you kidding me? Like, they're going to do this? And then, of course, the liaison officer, who was from Roseville, Greg Lewandowski, love the man. He is absolutely wonderful. He said, if that's what you want, then we'll reach out to the cathedral and see what we can do. And this was Lima. No ask is out of the question. So 2 days later, we went in and, yep, we can have it there.
So they set up a meeting with the bishop's assistant on Monday, and we went in and we had to pick, the readings and the music, and they gave us the rules, no eulogy, none of this, The pomp and circumstance is very, very minimal with the church.
The one thing my kids asked me, his favorite song was Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And they wanted it to be played. And it took some doing because the church was obviously not real crazy about it. But we were able to have them play Somewhere Over the Rainbow when we walked in the church. So we did get that. And to walk into a church, to walk up those cathedral steps and turn around and look, to see the sea of blue and brown and navy blue was just so overwhelming. The rows of cars, 4 across the street, and they're hundreds deep. The entire church was full, and there were people outside.
It was, the funeral was at the cathedral in St. Paul. Holds 3,000 people, I think, something like that. It was packed, and there were officers lined up outside because there wasn't enough room inside, even with a capacity of 3,000. The turnout there was incredible. And the day of the funeral, it was, weather-wise, was a beautiful day. The day Joe was killed, it was a beautiful day. And that is one thing that sticks out in my mind. Yeah, it sticks out in my mind how such a beautiful day weather-wise could be such a horrible day.
I was just so impressed that there was all this support for him. And then when we walked up those stairs and into the cathedral, and inside they had, I think, all of St. Paul's department was there, and Maplewood had gone in before we did. And I just kept looking around and taking it all in. I don't remember crying, which I thought was kind of weird. I didn't remember crying because I'm a crybaby most of the time. But I just remember taking it all in. And, years later, I worked at a car dealership, and they hired a new lady to be our boss or whatever. And she was a Gold Star mom. And she told me that she did the same thing. She said her husband was grieving terrible. And she said, I just took it all in. She's like, I didn't want to forget this day. And so I think that's what I was trying to do.
Joe's niece, Ashley, who really looked up to her Uncle Joe, was just 16 when she attended Joe's funeral with the family.
His funeral was one of the most, if not the most impactful, and influential moments of my life. You know, seeing my loved ones suffering and being tormented by his loss, you know, and watching my father quietly sob and try to hold back all of his pain just so he could stay strong for his family. Like that broke me. Knowing that my Aunt Gail will no longer have her husband, and, you know, that Sam and Al will no longer have their father, and that my dad, who was basically raised by Joe, will no longer have his brother and one of the biggest influences in his life. That was something that, as like an empath, that ate at me for a very, very long time. The hundreds of strangers and community members, kids, adults, older people, like, that were lined up on the street with flags and signs, crying with us as we passed by in the motorcade on our way to and from the St. Paul Cathedral. That was such an emotional experience. I remember I held it together for the most part until on Highway 35, there was a road worker out wearing his, you know, reflective vest, and he was standing next to an electronic road sign, and he just looked beat, like he'd just been working for hours, and he just looked exhausted. But there he was standing next to the road sign saluting, and the road sign just simply said, "Thanks, Joe." You don't think that something that small would impact somebody, but it's something that I remember, you know, 15 years ago that it's still so vivid in my memory. And
the procession, you know, if it would have gone in a straight line from the cathedral to the cemetery, would not have passed through any part of Maplewood. So they changed the route so it did loop through Maplewood. You know, the people that were lining the streets and signs that were up and things like that were incredible to see. And then, you know, the turnout at the cemetery. And Gail decided to have Joe buried at St. John's Cemetery in Little Canada. And St. John's is my wife and I's church. And we have cemetery plots in that cemetery. And unbeknownst to us, unbeknownst to Gail, Joe's plot is in the very same row as our plots are. So Joe's buried, you know, 8, 10, a dozen plots away from where we will eventually be buried.
Church was overflowing. It was completely full, and there was thousands of officers outside on the grass areas around the entrance. And we took Joe out of the car and processed into the church and all the way down to the front. And it was strange because, like, the night before, the bishop's assistant called and said, you can bring the flag in. They weren't allowing any eulogies, and he allowed 2. So Dave Tamalo spoke, and Joe's nephew, who's a police sergeant over in Chaska, Mike Duzan, spoke. And don't know if that was, you know, I'm sure he got feedback from the community, or if it was just, you know, divine intervention.
Allie remembers being so amazed at how many people were there to honor her dad.
I remember walking into the church and seeing people like there were thousands of officers standing outside, shoulder to shoulder, up and down these hills. They had TV screens and monitors outside so people could watch the service because the inside of the church was already full. I can't even put it into words. That's the one thing I remember, is walking in and seeing all of these people and being completely humbled by seeing how many people either knew my dad or was there to support my dad, and just looking through the crowd and trying to find just a single person I knew. But knowing all of these people were here for my dad and knew him some way or another, that was just astonishing to me.
Dave Longman was recovering from his injuries and wanted to attend the funeral to support Joe's family. Yet he was worried about being a distraction. The media had been trying to get a hold of him. Now, he knew this day was about Joe Bergeron. It was about Joe and his family, and Dave just wanted to blend in as a fellow officer and pay his respects to Joe.
I remember going out in procession to the cemetery, and I remember seeing all these guys and gals with the full-size flags as the procession came in, and the long procession. And I remembered the weight that we had until all the squad cars and all the officers were able to park and then to walk over to the burial site. And I didn't want to be a distraction at Joe's funeral because this was about Maplewood and about him and his family. And I wanted to try and blend into everybody else, into the crowd. But it was it was probably one of the most emotional days of my life.
4357. 4357. Attention all units, stand by for one item. The Maplewood Police Department is requesting a 10-1 moment of silence in honor of Sergeant Joseph Anthony Bergeron, who was born into our law enforcement family on November 25th, 1960. Joe began his tour of duty with the Maplewood Police Department on September 17th, 1984. He was highly respected by the community and his peers. He is a true hero to all of us. Joe, all your brothers and sisters in law enforcement, fire, and EMS, thank you for always being there when we needed you. Your leadership abilities were second to none. Your call for duty above and beyond. We will never forget. Even though Joe is 10-7, ending his tour of duty on Earth, he is now 10-8, beginning a new tour of duty with our other fallen comrades and proudly watching over us. His spirit will continue to live on in our hearts and prayers. Rest in peace, Joey B. Maplewood Squad 4357, Badge 357 is 10-7. End of tour May 1st, 2010. Ramsey County Dispatch, Maplewood Police Department, signing off, STAC 4.
Allie and Sam had been competing in archery, and Joe was super proud of the fact that both girls had qualified for nationals, and they were all looking forward to traveling to nationals, which ended up being right after Joe's funeral.
So they shot bow and arrow competitively, and they had qualified to go to nationals, and which is a pretty big deal. And Gail did not want to deny that to them, so their plan was, if Joe wouldn't have been killed, they were going to drive to Kentucky for this. And again, like I say, there's evil in the world, and there's people that are not very good people. But Gail was like, we're not traveling without me and my wife, because she was in no state, for one. And I don't know if she had an inkling something was going to happen, but she would have been really vulnerable there. And somebody reached out to Matthew's Bow and Arrow, and they offered up to pay for the girls and Gail and my wife and I to go to Kentucky and participate, so the girls could participate in the nationals. So we get to Kentucky, and I don't know if they were part of a marketing team or part of the company that sent us there, but they showed up at the event, and they were filming, and they wanted to do a story on the girls. And Kentucky State Police does the security at that event. It's where they hold the Kentucky Derby. So I went and I found one of them, the troopers, and I explained to them who Gail and the girls were and why we were there, and that we just buried their dad a week ago. And those people weren't there anymore. They were escorted away.
Joe was gone. Nationals were done. Now it was time for Gail and the girls to figure out their new normal, and it was time for the girls to go back to school.
We went back to school. I want to say it was either within a week or 2 weeks. We weren't out of school for long. And I remember I was told this by friends, that they had made an announcement on the set, like we were coming back to school and to treat us normally. I remember walking through the doors of school on that first day we came back, and literally having people just stare at us as Al and I walked through the hallways. And like teachers didn't know what to do with us when we came to our classes. And how can you? What do you say to a 13-year-old who just found, who just had to bury their dad because he was murdered? Like, what do you say to that?
There would be only one court hearing for Joe's remaining killer. On July 1st, 21-year-old Joshua Michael Martin agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to aiding and abetting homicide and kidnapping, admitting that he and Jason Jones had approached Joe on the trail after the carjacking. Martin admitted to distracting Joe while Jones shot Joe point blank in the forehead. Joe never had a chance, never had time to even take off his seatbelt. In court, the district judge told Martin, "The best I can do for our community is to lock you away for as long as I can within the parameters of the plea agreement." The judge sentenced Martin to 35 years and 9 months in prison for his merciless acts of violence against innocent people. Martin is now known as Minnesota Offender 232780 and is housed at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud. He will be eligible for release in 2034. That year, Joe Bergeron was the 17th officer to die in the line of duty in Minnesota in just 10 years. He was also less than a year away from retirement.
I lost a friend, I lost a coworker, really kind of a confidant in the department, because like I said, we could sit and hash things out in a way that I couldn't with other people in the department. So it was kind of a unique relationship there. I mean, he got promoted to sergeant, and I think he was happy there. I don't think he wanted to be promoted any further, but yet he could impact things in the department that I as the chief couldn't. But, I know he was getting close to considering retirement, and, would have been missed as a retired officer, but, still able to call him up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" But unfortunately, we can't do that now. So it was, I describe it as the worst day of my career. And, it's something that'll always be with me.
It's impossible to explain to you everyone who was impacted by Joe within the community and within law enforcement. His impact on the community was evident by the overwhelming and incredible show of support from the citizens at both his visitation and the funeral. People from all walks of life, people who Joe helped, people who he arrested. And in doing so, many of them he helped become better because of his kindness, because of how he cared for everyone, because of how Joe treated everyone like he would want to be treated. In addition to all Joe did for the community while he was here, he was also an organ donor, and 37 people benefited from his willingness to give. There are many cops who were influenced by Joe, many who continue to be great cops today because of what they learned from Joe, and many amazing people who decided to become cops because of Joe. Joe's nephew Mike, who spoke at the funeral, does what he does today because of Joe's influence.
4/18/10/25.
Mike Duzan was about an hour into his shift the first Saturday in May when radio chatter about a manhunt in the East Metro concerned him.
Well, I learned that it was a Maplewood officer that was hurt, that was shot and killed. And I had a bad feeling. I don't want anybody to get hurt, and I don't want anybody to be killed. But I certainly didn't want it to be my Uncle Joe. And about a half hour later, my worst fears were realized.
With tears and smiles, Duzan talks about his Uncle Joe, who inspired him as a teen to follow his footsteps and become a police officer.
What really struck me is people like my Uncle Joe are who they call when they need help for just about anything. I want to be the guy that people call when they need help, and I want to be able to help them.
He loved riding in his Uncle Joe's squad car, watching how he treated people, even when they were in trouble with the law.
He taught me and others to always be nice to people, not just as a police officer, but as a person. Someday, if I work really hard, maybe someday I can be just like you.
The day after after delivering his emotional tribute to his uncle at the cathedral in St. Paul, Duzan was back on patrol, as he's been for almost 15 years.
I can honestly say there hasn't been a shift that I've worked where I haven't at least once thought, wonder how Uncle Joe would handle this one. All right, have a good day.
And to those who wonder if his uncle's death has changed his feelings about being a cop.
This is why I'm here. I learned that through my Uncle Joe. Somebody has to do this job, and I want to be that somebody.
Joe's niece, Ashley, who was just 16 years old when Joe died, made the decision at his funeral that she wanted to be a cop, just like her Uncle Joe. It was at his funeral that she felt the calling to serve.
That day at the burial site, surrounded by the thousands of officers from everywhere, I felt that calling there. The only thing I can describe it as is like I felt the pull to be a part of something that was much bigger than myself, and to give back to the community and the people who gave so much to me and my family. And I knew that I not wanted but needed to be there for people in their worst times, because that's exactly what those officers did for my family. And I know that that is what Joe did for so many people. So for me, the death of Joe didn't need to be just darkness, loss, and anguish and anger. It had to be more. Like, I knew through his death would come purpose, and for the choice to carry on the values that he stood for, and for what all those thousands of officers that day stood for. So in basic terms, I mean, he's the reason I became a police officer. Not because of the way he died, and not because of the recognition that he received. It's how he lived with such kindness, such courage, strength, humor, love, not only for his friends and family, but, you know, for those he encountered. Like, I think all cops need a purpose and a drive that keeps them going, not just from day one, but, you know, every single day for years and years down the road. And, you know, I don't have to tell you, as a law enforcement officer, like, we experience a lot of trauma, loss, and darkness. And, like, for me, whenever those times happen, which they happen, they'll continue to happen because that's just the nature of the beast. Like, I remember that calling, and I remember that feeling that day at the burial site, feeling that calling and feeling the purpose to keep what Joe had alive.
Ashley earned her law enforcement degree and has served at the Maplewood Police Department, where her uncle served, since 2017. She started in patrol and also served as an honor guard member to help honor other fallen heroes. She moved into community outreach and then was promoted to detective. Remember, Ashley's father, Larry, was Joe's brother, who served in Polk County, Wisconsin in corrections. He also served as a part-time officer for a couple communities in the county and volunteered with the ambulance service, just like his older brother, Joe. Oh, and remember that highway worker Ashley talked about that made such a big impact on her? The guy that had the electronic sign that said, "Thanks, Joe"? Well, we did some research, and although he no longer works with the highway department, we found out his name is Adam Breheim, and he lives in the Twin Cities metro area. Adam said Joe was friends with his dad. He remembers Joe would often stop by and visit them while on duty, and he specifically remembers Joe was very good at his Etch-a-Sketch, which other family members also confirmed that Joe had a talent with the Etch-a-Sketch. Adam said Joe's influence led him to first join Maplewood Police Explorers, where Joe was his advisor. Then he joined the fire department, where Joe was his captain. And finally, he decided to go to school to become a cop, like Joe. Remember that long list of Bergerons that we talked about earlier who've all served within law enforcement? Well, there's one more we need to tell you about. It's Joe's daughter, Sam. Originally, she was going to college as an art major, but would later be influenced by her cousin Ashley and by her father Joe to continue the family's legacy of service.
I finished out high school and went into community college thinking I wanted to be an art major. Clearly that didn't work out for me. Wasn't very realistic. But yeah, I just, I was doing my general associate's degree, and part of that, I took some elective classes, and one of those was a criminal justice class. And in the criminal justice class, they wanted us to do some form of volunteering. So I did, I worked for like a soup kitchen, and then part of that, they were like, oh, you can count one ride along as like a volunteer hour day. So I was like, sweet. So I actually reached out to Ashley and I did a ride-along at Maplewood. And I remembered after that, I was like, this job is actually kind of cool. I did a ride-along with her, and then after that ride-along, I switched my degree to criminal justice. And then I started my CSO job at Lino, and then made the flip, moved on to Metro State University for my 4-year degree while I was working almost full-time as a CSO. And then the rest is history.
Never thought either of the girls would want to get into anything public safety. I mean, you know, they lived the nightmare of the police chief showing up at your front door with a chaplain. I mean, that's the nightmare that all of us think about, you know. And so both the girls are going to college, and Sam has an opportunity for an internship, and she takes that internship at Maplewood. And she got bit. She got bit by the cop bug and loved it. And the folks at Maplewood were like, you know, we just hired CSOs. This would be a great job for you. When it opens up, please apply. And she came home and was telling me about what happened and how she was excited and intrigued. And I said, well, it just so happens that we're going to be posting for CSO. And then we had a long conversation on, I want to do this, but I really don't want to do it at Maplewood. I don't want to have anybody think that I'm doing this because of who my dad was. She was adamant, even back then, that I need to make my own way. And I was really proud of her of that. So she applied, and we're public safety, and I'm running the fire division, and we have a leadership meeting once a week, and I didn't say anything. She applied. I think we had like 13 applicants, and she nailed it. My line to her when she was getting ready for the interview was, be yourself. Don't pretend you know anything about being a cop. Don't pretend anything. They're going to ask you situational questions. And she was working in retail. And I said, you deal with it in retail. People come in, they're upset, they want to return something. They don't think the service was good. They don't think what they bought from you is very good. And you have to deal with that. Those are difficult people to deal with. That's what we deal with at work. So relate stories that when they ask you, tell us about a time you had to deal with somebody who was difficult. Use one of your times where you had to do that in your job. And I said, they don't want to hear, well, I was a reserve, or I was an explorer. They want to know what your real life experience is. She nailed it. A couple weeks later, they're ranting and raving about Sam and how well she did, and they were doing her background, and then she listed me, and they were like, so you know her? And I go, Joe Bergeron's daughter. And you think, you know? So she was a CSO for about 3 years. She'd been a cop for about 3 years, and now she's an FTO for a police department. So made her own way, and it's all on her own, and she's a good cop. She has a lot of the same traits her dad did. Treats people well because she treats them how she would expect to be treated.
It had been 5 years since Joe was murdered, and now Sam, one of his twins, was a cop. Some would ask Gail how she could support her daughter becoming a cop after all she'd been through. To Gail, she said she had to support Sam.
You do it because you have to do it. I mean, it would be totally remiss of me not to support her in what she does, because she is a mini Joe. She looks like me, but she is a mini Joe. She is the only kid that I know that, just like her dad, will find whatever she's looking for.
If you're wondering what happened to Sam's twin sister, Allie, she too started law enforcement school with Sam, but eventually decided that wasn't for her. So then she earned several business-related degrees and eventually became a professional chef.
I started at Century College. Me and Sam both started there. We wanted to be able to go somewhere where we were still close to mom. We didn't want to leave mom alone. So we started at Century, and then I changed my major about half a bazillion times because I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I started off with an art major. In my head, I was going to do something with ceramics. I was going to get an art degree, and I was, going to throw pots and sell pots and become this famous artist. And then, reality sits in a little bit. So then I changed to psychology, and then I took essentially every single psychology class at Century. And then I said, I don't want to be a psychologist. I'm going to go to school for criminal justice. I said, I'm going to be a police officer like my dad. That's what I'm going to do. So then I got into the transfer program with Sam, where we started taking our courses at Century and then would finish up at Metro. And I got 1 semester and skills away from being a police officer. And I said, nope, this is not what I want to do. I am 1 semester away from being a certified officer. Yeah. I said, nope, this is actually not what I want to do. So then I was like, the real issue I have is I want to be my own boss. I don't like being told what to do. And I want to be my own boss. This sounds fun. I can do something. So I went and I finally decided on getting my bachelor's degree in business. Well, I liked that so much, I got another bachelor's degree in marketing. So I have a 4-year in business, I have a 4-year in marketing, and I have a minor in economics. And I also have my associate arts degree. And so I decided that I wanted to open or do some kind of food-related business, whether it be a food truck, a storefront, catering. I wanted to do something like that. And after I graduated, I really didn't want to take my marketing degree and go into, big corporation marketing. I didn't want to sit at a desk and produce marketing stuff for these companies. I didn't want to be part of a corporation like Target or anything. That was not for me. And so I was like, what can I do to get my foot in the door food-wise? I want people to know who I am, what my talents are. And obviously I'm self-taught chef. I never did any formal training or anything like that. And I was like, what can I do? So I randomly Google searched one day, private chef jobs in Minnesota, not expecting to find anything. I mean, I found some that wanted 2 or 3 years of experience and you could be hired as a sous chef at some fancy catering something. And then I finally came across my job that I currently have right now, which is a private personal chef with a company called Friend That Cooks. And so I clicked on the job and I did some reading about it, and I was like, wow, this could be great. So I set my resume in thinking there's no way in heck these people are going to hire me. I don't have any type of culinary school. I have no actual certification, just my past experience in restaurants, because I'd always been in restaurants. I had to go through a circus of interviews. They do 3 different types of interviews, and you have to pass all 3. The last interview was a cooking interview. So I actually had to have 2 chefs come into my house and watch me cook for 2 hours, and I had to prepare 3 meals, all with side dishes, in 2 hours. And one had to be vegetarian or vegan. One was a dish of my choice. And the third one had to be some other type of culinary cuisine from a country that they selected. And I got Japan. Oh my gosh, you should have seen the kitchen afterwards. It was a complete disaster. I was so lucky that my family was there. They helped me clean up after they left, and we were doing dishes for an hour and a half. But yeah, the next day they called me and they said, yeah, you got the job. You start training next week. I have 10 different clients that I cook for. I go to their homes. I make a menu and I see what they have in their house. Whatever they don't have in the home, I go grocery shopping for. Then I come back, I cook, I clean, and then I leave. And then they have food for their entire week. I love my clients. I love my job.
When Allie was a little girl, she told everyone she was going to be a chef when she grew up. There's even this cute little caricature drawing of her. It was done when she was about 6 years old in her chef outfit. You can see that picture and many, many more on our website. Allie, like all the Bergerons, loves to help people, loves to take care of people, like her dad did. She just does it her own way. Her family loves it, and we're pretty sure her dad does too. Joe's law enforcement influence within this Bergeron family is pretty obvious. Even Joe's sister-in-law, Jackie, who married into this crazy family and never got into law enforcement herself, got involved with the Minnesota chapter of Concerns of Police Survivors after Joe was killed.
Well, a friend of mine had told me shortly after Joe passed away, her husband worked for St. Paul, and she worked for Target. And she said that. She said, you know that Target sponsors this police week in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, oh, what is this about? And so I went and I did some searching on the internet, and I found Police Week, and I found that COPS was one of their organizations that is one of the planners. And digging into the COPS website, I found that they had a chapter in Minnesota. So I reached out to them, and I went to a couple of their meetings that they had, and I just really liked the fact that there were other people there that had, had the same kind of loss, and had that experience. And then when we went to Washington, D.C., I saw how well they handled, those families and stuff like that, and the things that they did. And I'm like, my parents have always taught us to volunteer. We've always volunteered for things, and I just thought this was right up my alley, because I wanted to be there for the next family and to let them know that there's hope for a future.
Jackie has been involved with Minnesota Cops since 2013 and has held board positions as secretary, president, and treasurer. She's spent years helping fallen officer survivor families, all because of Joe.
He was just such a fun, loving, caring guy. Just that he was always there to help somebody out. Like, he was supposed to come up to our house to plant the food plot with Don. He was always willing to help somebody out when they needed it. He was so easy to talk to. I say that many times, that if those two guys had just given him a chance to talk, things might have been totally different.
It was interesting to see the day that we did the memorial or the visitation the night before the funeral, where the average people from town came in, and they would tell stories about how Joe maybe arrested them, and they were at a bad time in their life, and Joe arrested them, did his job, but also spent the extra time to say, here's where you can go for help, and if you want help, I can help you get it. And the stories of how people's lives were turned around, and they're good members of society because of that, and they are grateful for that. And so I guess what I'd want people to remember Joe as is who he was, what he stood for, and that you should practice what he used to preach. And society will be much better for that.
I want people to remember my dad for the person he was and not the way he died. I want them to remember his kindness and his sarcasm. And I want people to know and remember him for the way he'd always sing song lyrics a line before they would actually happen. I want him to be remembered for his smile and his goofy laugh. That was always something you could hear at our house, was my dad laughing. He was always so sarcastic and goofy and silly, and I know, and we all know, what an incredible police officer he was. But he was so much more than just a police officer. So for me personally, I want him to be remembered for the type of dad and the type of person he was.
In 2010, a granite boulder was placed near Arlington Avenue and the Bruce Vento Regional Trail where Joe was murdered. It states, with heartfelt gratitude, the community reclaims this earth, sacred ground, to honor a peaceful warrior. Joe Bergeron Pass, Bruce Vento Regional Trail. On May 19, 2015, Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton signed a bill into law designating Trunk Highway 36 in Maplewood as the Sergeant Joseph Bergeron Memorial Highway. The Minnesota Senate held a moment of silence after passing the bill and said the naming of Highway 36 in Sergeant Bergeron's honor was a small gesture of gratitude to his family for his ultimate sacrifice. It's not how he died that made Joe a hero. Joe was a hero because of how he lived, how he treated people, how he cared about people. His willingness to love, to laugh, and to live in a way that exemplified what it means to be not only the amazing cop he was, but the amazing friend, father, and mentor. Influences that continue to this day. Joe was an amazing person, always willing to run towards danger when 99.9% of us would run away, willing to give his life to save others, whether he knew them or not. Joe's murder, Joe's death, set off a series of events that would ultimately end the violence these two committed within this community. When his killer pulled the trigger, there was no way Joe's fellow officers in this part of the Twin Cities were going to let these two get away, including retired officer and firefighter Bill Longman, who witnessed his shooting and quickly responded to Joe's side and gave out important information about the two killers, and now retired St. Paul officer Dave Longman, who ultimately killed the shooter and in doing so helped identify the second suspect. Joe's death ultimately ended the string of violence, ended the growing list of victims of these two killers, ultimately made this community safer, made this community stronger. Joe's family and his agency have shared with us many photos about Joe that you can see on his memorial page on our website. Please keep his family in your thoughts and prayers and share his story with family and friends. Together, we can help ensure Maplewood Police Sergeant Joseph Anthony Bergeron's service and sacrifice is never forgotten.
Walking eastbound.
Thank you for spending the time to listen, learn about, and honor the memory of this fallen hero. Make sure you take the time to thank your local law enforcement for their service and their sacrifice. And don't forget to thank their families too. They also sacrifice so much for our safety. It's up to us to help ensure the sacrifices made by these fallen heroes and by their families are never forgotten. So please share this podcast with family and friends. Until next time, this is the Officer Down Memorial Podcast. I'm Scott Rose. Thanks for listening.